They are primarily, especially Micah, he is primarily, Sister Jasmine Brooks, writing to the southern kingdom. Israel had had some civil war, and they had some disagreements and so on and so forth, and so the kingdom ends up being split. So you end up with the northern and the southern kingdom. God's word comes through the prophet and speaks to the people. Now, we have to be clear and careful not to get the book of Micah mixed up with the man Micah. Micah is the man, and he was a prophet, but the book of Micah is our main concern, because this is the prophecy itself. Sometimes people get so caught up in the character, they want to talk about the weeping prophet, or they want to talk about Isaiah, or they want to talk about Hosea, and so on and so forth, and they get caught up into the history around the prophet, and they miss the prophecy. Because the prophecy is the word of God. This is God's word through the prophet, and so that's what becomes important. So Isaiah, Micah, writing around the same time, and they're writing primarily to the southern kingdom, and I'm talking about Isaiah from Jerusalem. Micah was basically talking to the southern kingdom. The southern kingdom we know as Judah. Hosea and Amos, they were writing to the northern kingdom. By the time Micah starts writing, the northern kingdom is practically in ruins. Part of his writing, the northern kingdom, is probably just gone altogether. This becomes important because as Micah talks to the southern kingdom, he is saying to them initially, be careful. Because if you look up north at what has happened to them, if you don't live right, it's soon to happen to you. Now, if you think about it, many of us have witnessed division in our life. And we can see that in this text, there is a reason to understand that division causes us to be vulnerable. Because as they were divided, it opened them up to have to fight and not being whole in their fight. I'm going somewhere with this. Sister Littlefield, sometimes we fail to realize that we are divided in ourselves. See, when you talk about division, a lot of times, Brother Saunders, people think that division only comes when there are two people or more. But for those of us who are willing to admit that we talk to ourselves, then you know there are times when you are divided with yourself. And you realize that there have been times when part of us has died off. There's parts of us that are numb to whatever. Some of us are numb to our relationships because they've been so rocky. Some of us are numb to prosperity. We're so comfortable being poor, it's okay. Some of us are numb to our bodies. We're so sick and we've ate this so long that it doesn't matter. I'm used to being sick. And parts of our life lie dormant, and parts of our lives are very good. I don't know about you, but for me, there are times when it seems like all the burners are not working right at the same time. And so we wonder and we struggle because we're then handicapped. We're handicapped. We're disadvantaged. We're having to rely on the one thing to take care of the other thing. And so what happens is sometimes if you know that from the neck up you're not doing too good, then you put on nice stockings and you show your legs. And sometimes you've heard it said, well, she got a pretty face. My point is that oftentimes we try to fix up the best part. And there are times when we leave the worst part, or the part that we don't like the most in our lives, we leave it unkept and undone. And because we leave it alone so long, ultimately it dies. These two kingdoms were divided, although they should have been together. Now, sometimes we're divided in ourselves, sometimes we're divided in our relationships. Sometimes there are marriages, the kingdom ought to be together, but it's divided. Mama's on one page, and daddy's on another page. Micah was simply telling the southern kingdom that the northern kingdom has already failed, and if you keep on, the southern kingdom will too. Let me tell you that if you let one thing go, what happens is over time we begin to let the best of what we have go, and for too long, everything is gone. Because there is some value in maintenance and restoration. See, sometimes, as Brother Saunders can tell you, when we were in a building project at the old building, we would start to tear apart one thing only to understand that we had to fix something else. Maintenance in your life is important because as you begin to get into some things, Brother Williams, you'll find out there's some other things that you need to fix too. When you don't do any maintenance, then what happens is everything begins to fall apart all at the same time. Maintenance in your life is important. It's important to maintain so that you can hold on to what God has for you. And so here we find the southern kingdom not really recognizing that they're falling into the same trap that caused the northern kingdom destruction. And so Micah comes to write to them as a contemporary of Isaiah. And he says some of the very same things that Hosea and Amos have to say to the northern kingdom. He says some of those same things to the southern kingdom. And so what we find as he writes this book is we find basically two sections. The first section, he tells them, here is the problem that you're headed toward with God. The last section of the book, he basically recaps and says, this is what I said before, and here's what's going to happen if you don't get right. And so in Micah, we almost see something that might be familiar to Dr. Littlefield in the legal world, because we almost see an indictment that is brought forward against God's people. An indictment that God himself delivers. That's why Micah starts by saying, hear what the Lord has to say. And then he summons some witnesses. He summons the mountains to hear the accusation. And then we proceed into the case. And so this morning, for just a moment, how not to catch a case with God. We know what that means to catch a case. You know what that means to catch a case? Nobody really wants to catch a case. I've often said, as one who grew up in the neighborhood, I'll call it, the hood for short, what you find out, Sister Thelma Island, is that most people from the hood are not scared of the police. We're scared of the sheriff. Police and sheriff, two different things. Police come, please excuse me, Brother Williams, but when the police come, we figure he might give us a warning. They might let us go. But when the sheriff comes, he comes with a letter. He's either taking you or he's leaving a letter to tell you that you must appear. And when you get a message from the sheriff, that means that your life might just change forever. Because that means you got to catch a case. And what you don't want to do is catch a case. When the police come, there is some discretion. Oftentimes a police officer has discretion. He can tell you, okay, now y'all been fighting or whatever. Y'all need to separate yourself. You go one way, you go the other. There's some discretion. When the sheriff comes, most of the time he comes by order of the court. And he has to perform whatever the judge told him to do. The sheriff can't change what the judge says. So if Franklin County judge say, go pick him up, sheriff got to pick you up. Sheriff can't decide not to give you the judge's the order. And so when Micah comes, Micah is not like the police. Micah is like the sheriff. He comes with a letter and he says, the people of God, there are some problems and I need to help you so that you don't catch a case with God. I am this morning thinking about you and I'm saying to you, you don't want to catch a case with God. And so if I might share with you some ways to keep from catching a case with God. He says, listen to what the Lord says. Let me just give you this parenthetically. The first thing to do is really listen to God. Yes. That's really the first thing you want to do. That's not in your notes. I'm just giving you this free. The first thing you want to do is listen to God. Because if you don't follow the directions and you don't listen to the directions, you're going to mess up anyway. So you got to listen to God. But here's what he says. Listen to God. Stand up. Plead my case before the mountains. You need to remember that you didn't even come first. Remember that you didn't come first. In other words, you need to remember what you are made out of. He called the mountains to hear. He called the earth to hear because guess what? We think we so bright, but Reverend Haynes, we nothing but a bunch of dust mixed all up, some dirt, mixed all up in the hands of God, and his breath is in us. Sometimes we think we're so much more special than the mountains, but the fact is, we're not that much more. When we go to God, we need to remember that we are not speaking to God on his level. We are not God. And oftentimes, because we have breath and we can think and those kinds of things, we begin to feel like we're on God's level. I can walk in and talk to God any kind of way I want to. I can make demands of God. We are not on God's level. All we are, we're not even as strong as the mountain. Drive your car into the mountain and see what happens. The mountain will still be there. And so the fact is, we are dust, and yet, Brother Rocky, we're not even strong enough. We're not even strong enough dust to withstand a car crash. We can't withstand anything. The mountain can withstand a whole lot. And so he calls the mountain. The mountain came before us. And he called them to testify, to listen, to hear. So he says, stand before the mountain. I want you to think about how great God is. That's really the point here. Stand before the mountain and think about how great God is. Now, this is also the time for me to say something that you oftentimes will not hear in church, Sister Magwood, and I'm just going to park here for a moment and also say that it ought to tell us, and this is something that Christian people are oftentimes not concerned about, and that is that we should be concerned about our environment. The earth came before we did, and God made us to have dominion and to take care of the earth, and oftentimes we don't take care of the earth like we should. Now, I know that it's been very controversial, Pastor King, what I said a few years ago. There are some people who are still saying, Pastor, I just can't do it. I can't believe it. I don't know what you're talking about. But I've said to our people that you need to be very careful about some resources that you use. One of those things, you ready for it, Deacon Palmer? We need to curb our use of large towels. It does not take a beach towel to dry you off. You think it does, but it doesn't. It does not take a beach towel to dry you off. I used to use, if I were to go to wash or shower, bathe, any of those kind of things, I would take a hand towel, a washcloth, and a towel, a big towel. You got to have all three of them. And then, you know, when you go to the hotel, you lay out the towel to step out on. So you got 4 towels that you're using. Do you know that every one of those towels that you use has to use detergent to be cleaned? Oftentimes they're cleaned in hot water, which uses gas, natural resource. We're using the water. West Virginia can tell us that when water gets contaminated, it's not a good thing. And so we're using all of that every time we take a bath. We're using all of those towels. Do you know that you only need 1 or 2 washcloths for a bath or a shower? A washcloth will dry you off. A small washcloth will dry you off. You will have to wring it out a few times. It's going to take you a little more work, but it will dry you off. I have not used a big towel in years. After I read this study about all of the water that we use to wash those big things and the energy that we use, it will even save you money because those big towels oftentimes cost you a whole nother load of laundry that you got to do because you're using the big towels. And so you're losing money right there. That's your environment that we're talking about. Now, I know that's not something that people preach about and folks get to shouting, Brother Tracy. But this is true, and God wants us to be good stewards. We need to recycle. You need to use the blue bins. You need to save and separate your paper and your cardboard and those kinds of things. You need to separate. You need to recycle. You need to be representing God in a way that is responsible toward the earth. You need to make sure that you use less water. A shower uses less water than a bath. I know some of my seniors have to use a bath, but for you younger people, a shower is what you ought to use, and you ought to take a Navy shower at that. Deacon Hodge, I know you that Navy man, you know you got to save the water. Do you know that someday water will cost more than fuel, more than gasoline? Because guess what? I know you don't believe this, but it's true. Sister Tamika, we don't have to have gas. You don't need gasoline. You do not have to have gasoline. Gasoline is not necessary. But Sister Maria, you have to have water. You can't live without water. Your babies can't live without water. We have to have water. And so if we pollute and contaminate all the water, then think about it. Water will become so expensive that we can't afford it, and people will be dying from thirst. We must have water. And so you've got to save your water. Take a shower. Now, what does that mean? That means you don't turn the shower on and then leave the bathroom, walk around and do other things while the shower warms up the bathroom. You don't do that. You're wasting water. You turn the shower on when you get in. And then you don't leave it running for long periods of time. Number one, that's even bad on your skin. That's skin cancer when you have that water just running and running and running and running. You get in with the purpose of cleaning yourself enough to get some soap and then rinse off and then leave that shower. That's how it works. For those of you who are head of household, change your water or your shower head. Change it. Everywhere you go, whether you go to Lowe's, if you go to Home Depot, you go to Walmart, you can find what's called a water-saving shower head. Buy it. Use it. We must conserve water. Clothes, wash them in dark loads when you can. Separate them so that you can use more cold water than hot water. When Sister Kelly and when I would do laundry, I always made certain that we only had one white load a week. And that was the only hot load that I ran all week. Now, to tell you the truth, your pastor does now have one luxury in life. I don't do laundry anymore, so I thank God for that. But when I did laundry, I did one white load per week. There are several reasons why. Let me tell you, if you're head of household, I never let children run my washing machine. Now, the reason why, Sister Vicky Williams, is because the washing machine is the only appliance in my entire house or in anybody's house that uses 3 utilities at one time. It uses electricity, it uses water, and it uses gas all at the same time. So out of everything in your house, if you want to look at something that's using a lot of your utilities at one time, it is your washing machine. So one white load a week, that gives you one hot load. Save our planet, save our earth. Be good stewards. Now you say, Pastor, why are you telling me this? Because I want you to be a good Christian. And the Bible tells us that we ought to be good stewards of the earth. They were here before you. So take care of the earth. Don't catch a case with God. Look at verse 3. My people, what have I done to you? How have I burdened you? Answer me. How not to catch a case with God? Remember, we don't come first, but then analyze your defense. Analyze your defense. Sister Brittany, you know what your defense against God is? You don't have one. That's what he's saying when he said, what have I done to you? You don't have a defense against God. So you ought to know what your defense is. If you decide to put there was a play years ago said, your arms are too short to box with God. You don't have a defense with God. I hear people say, I'm so mad at God. And you need to check your defense. You don't have a defense with God. He hasn't done anything to you. All he's done is good for you. And so we don't have a defense against God. When you get to the courthouse, one of the things that a good lawyer do, won't even take a case that's no good. You go to the lawyer, you know how you have a little consultation, Sister Washington? You go in there, you tell the lawyer your little case, and then the lawyer will tell you whether you got a case or not. And they'll say, and if you watch Law and Order, you know I watch that sometimes, and sometimes they'll go to the DA's office and say, y'all don't have enough for a case. And so you need to analyze your defense and recognize that you don't have nothing for a case against God. And so first thing first, recognize there's nothing in your briefcase against God. Look at verse 4 and notice it says, I brought you up out of Egypt and redeemed you from the land of slavery. I sent Moses to lead you, also Aaron and Miriam. You need to also remember redemption. While you're busy trying to plead a case against God, remember that God has already defended you. How are you going to come against the one that has delivered you? How are you going to come against somebody who's already done for you? He's delivered you. And then notice it brings up Aaron and Miriam. One of the reasons it brings up Miriam is because if you remember when they crossed the Red Sea, after they got across the Red Sea, Miriam gathered up some of the women folk and they started singing a song of praise toward what God had done. And so we ought to always remember that praise is in order for God. We should never get to a place where we forget that the Lord has brought us out. A song should always ring out in our heart that praises God. Even in the midst of our struggles and our trials and our tribulations, he's already done more than enough. Yes. I wish there was somebody here, Brother Danny, that knew that the Lord has already done more than enough for us. If he never does anything else, he's already done enough. And so we ought to always have a song of praise toward the Lord. Remember that he has brought us out. Never forget, otherwise you might catch a case with God. If you don't forget, then you'll realize in verses 6 and 7 it says, with what shall I come before the Lord and bow down before the exalted God? Shall I come before him with burnt offerings, with calves a year old? Will the Lord be pleased with thousands of rams, with 10,000 rivers of oil? Shall I offer my firstborn for my transgression, the fruit of my body for the sin of my soul? You need to respect God. That's how you keep from catching a case with God, is you respect God. And when you respect God, you don't come into God's presence any kind of way. Amen. And when we have some respect and we come into God's presence with an open heart and mind toward God, ready to receive him, rejecting the wiles and the ways of the devil, but saying, God, here I am, bowed down before you. When you respect God, then you'll find out there's a way. You know, I've been really bothered sometimes when I have had to go down to the courthouse either to represent or to be with members, or if I've had to go down there to file any papers for the church and things like that. Brother Saunders and I have had to go down there to file tax papers and things for the church. And as we've gone down there, there are times when I see some of our young people and even some of our older people going to court. And I watch some of the folk going to court, and I watch them as they go into the courthouse, and I think to myself, you know, young man, young woman, you might not make it out the way you look going in. You know, you don't just go before the judge looking any kind of way. You don't go in looking guilty. But I tell you, when you get ready to go to court, if you're from my generation, then you know that you're supposed to put on a proper pair of pants, pull them all the way up, put on your best belt, your best shoes, shine them up, put on a shirt and tie, and even if you were guilty, you go in there looking like you haven't done anything and say, Your Honor, I'm innocent. You comb your hair before you go to the judge. You don't go to the judge any kind of way. You don't go in there looking like, I don't care if you convict me or not. No, I don't want to go to jail. I don't want to go to prison. I'm going to pull out my best suit. If the sheriff comes to my door and tells me I got to go see the judge, I tell you, Bro Williams, I'm going to be cleaner than a mosquito when I get down there. I'm going to be sharp when I walk in the courtroom. I haven't done nothing, Your Honor. I'm going to be walking sideways and clean. When we come into God's presence, we ought not just come any kind of way. We ought to come into God's presence with reverence. We ought to humble ourselves. We ought to make some changes when we come into God's presence. The reason that oftentimes we catch a case with God is because we come to God any kind of way. And God expects our respect because he's worthy of our praise. He's worthy of our respect. He's worthy for us to come into his presence the right way. But then look at verse 8, and we'll go on home. It says, he has shown you, O mortal, what is good, and what does the Lord require of you, to act justly and to love mercy and to walk humbly with your God. So how not to catch a case with God? Remember, we didn't come first. Analyze your defense, which is you don't have one. Remember redemption, respect God, but then follow what we've been shown. Follow what we've been shown. I know yesterday I had a wonderful time with our men as we got together for our fellowship. And I remember one of our conversations on yesterday, I said to somebody, you know, my grandmother always told us, if you know better, you ought to do better. I've never understood why people love to embrace the thought that I know better, but I'm going to do it this way anyhow. If you know better, you ought to do better. And Micah is simply saying, Sister Green, you've been shown the right way. If you've been shown the right way, you ought to do the right way. Why do it wrong once you've learned how to do it right? Why be backward? If you are a Christian and you consider yourself a child of God and you really respect God, then that means that you have some not only respect for God, but you have some respect for yourself. Recognizing that you don't want to bring shame on the family. I would hope that if my children were in some kind of trouble, they wouldn't use my name while they're in that trouble. Yeah, that's right. I would hope they would have enough respect that they don't want to mess up because we don't want our Father's name to be drug in this mess. We ought to be so reverent toward God and recognizing that he's shown us the right way. And I don't want to bring anything against God. I don't want anybody to say anything about the church. But I want to do my best to put my best foot forward. I want them to know that I know better. I don't want to say I don't know any better. You know, I tell you, sometimes eating with the upper crust is a little different. Because, Sister Melissa, it seems like they got all kinds of rules. They got rules, you know, and I've had to learn those rules over the years because I like to eat like I like to eat at home, you know. I like to take, the teens were looking at me this week, they said, you put your cracker in your tea. I said, I like my biscuit in my tea. And so I dunk my biscuit down in my tea. I like to open the Oreo up and take all the filling out. You know how we do it. You know, I like to take my cornbread and dunk it down in my greens and all that kind of thing. But when you're eating with the upper crust, you got to recognize that you got many knives and forks and you need to know where they go. Somebody told me years ago, Brother Lamar, I was eating with some rich folks, and I was in one of them good places, and I noticed that their bread, they only needed one piece of bread, And I had a piece of bread, I done opened the bread up and put the butter all over it, and close it up, and I'm biting off the bread and whatnot. And somebody told me, said, now, Reverend, that's not where you're supposed to eat bread. You break off a small piece, you butter that piece, and you put that whole piece in your mouth. And when you get ready for another piece, you get that piece, you butter that piece, you put that whole piece in your mouth. This just takes too long. But once I learned better, I began to do as I've been trained to do. And now I understand that if I'm eating in polite society, to turn the fork upside down so the prawns go in upside down so they can't see the food going in your mouth. I've learned that if there's a seed in my grapefruit, that the same spoon that put it in is the same spoon that takes it out rather than to spit it out in front of good company. And so as I began to learn that, finally God blessed me. And some of you might know, one day I opened my post office box and I had a letter from the President of the United States. Back when President Clinton was in office, he invited me to come and have breakfast with him. And I was so glad that people had given me little tips here and there and told me what to do while dining with the president, because then I didn't have to be embarrassed. I knew how to eat with those folks. Well, let me tell you that God has some requirements. He is inviting you to his table. He's inviting you to come and dine at his table. But there are some requirements, because we must know that he is looking for a church without spot or wrinkle. God is looking for a people, a peculiar people, that are willing to transform their ways to his ways. Don't go to God and say, well, I eat mine this way. Go to God and say, Lord, how do you want me to eat? How do you want me to die? Because God, I'll do it your way. I'll do it your way with my money. I'll do it your way with my resources. I'll do it your way with my finances. I'll do it your way with my relationships. I will do it your way with my thinking. I will do it your way, because God, I want to eat at your table. On my table, there are scraps. On your table is the best. I want to do it God's way. Because you know what? Not only does he give me the good food in the good times, but Brother Carter, I read that one of the psalmists said that he prepares a table before me in the presence of my enemies. What I like about God is he won't just feed you in the good times. He'll feed you even in the bad times. I don't know about you, but I've had some bad times in my life. Sometimes you have some good days and some bad days. But I'm so glad that God has been at the table every time. And he sets the table. Some of us used to get off the school bus, and you got off the school bus, and there was always a fight. Brother Lamar, sometimes you had to fight from the first step off the school bus all the way home. But you know, some of the things that you could thank God for when I was growing up is that I might have fought all the way home, but when I finally got home, I'd open the door and my mother would start to cooking, and I could smell those rolls in the oven, and I knew there was food in the house. What I'm saying to you is that sometimes we'll have to fight in the world, but there's refuge in the house of God. And so don't catch a case with God. Remember that we don't come first. Analyze your defense, and that is you don't have one. Remember redemption, respect God, and then follow what you've been shown. When you know better, do better. Today there may be those who are guests with us here at the Liberty